Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Thursday, the 25th of September in London. I'm Caroline Hepke. Coming up today, is this a Sputnik moment? HSBC says it's made a world-first breakthrough in quantum computing for financial markets. Not a bubble, but the new normal. Bank of America says that sky-high US stock valuations may be warranted more than in the past. Plus a bitter pill for the UK. The government offers an olive branch after pharmaceutical companies publicly condemn the country. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. HSBC says that it has made a breakthrough in quantum computing for trading using IBM's processor. The lender says it is the first time real trades have been used at scale to show the potential benefits of this emerging technology. Bloomberg's Chris Pitt has the details.
A Sputnik moment. That's how HSBC's executive in charge of quantum computing described their successful deployment of the technology in financial markets. The London-headquartered bank said it had used a Heron quantum processor to deliver a 34% improvement in predicting how likely a bond is to trade at a given price. HSBC's trial marks the first time a bank has used real trades at scale to demonstrate the benefits of quantum computing, which could now lead to a flurry of activity as financial companies step up efforts to harness the technology. In London, Chris Pitt, Bloomberg Radio.
Intel has approached Apple about an investment in a bid to secure its future. Bloomberg understands the two firms have had early-stage talks about working more closely together. Our US deals reporter Ryan Gould says an agreement could be pivotal for Intel.
This obviously comes on the back of both the US government investing in Intel directly, one of its largest shareholders, and also would potentially follow a $5 billion investment from both NVIDIA and a $2 billion investment from SoftBank. I guess one way to put this all together is, Intel is on the comeback.
Bloomberg's Ryan Gould speaking there. A deal with Apple would represent further validation of the chipmaker's turnaround efforts, although it's unlikely that Apple would switch back to Intel processors in its devices. Shares of Intel rose by 6.4% to $31.22 on Wednesday in New York after Bloomberg reported on the discussions. Strategists at Bank of America are making the case that sky-high valuations in the S&P 500 may be appropriate. In a note, the lender's head of equity and quantitative strategy has said that the higher quality makeup of the index and the potential for a boom in sales could justify the pricey levels, adding, perhaps we should anchor to today's multiples as the new normal. The comments come as the US equity index has taken a breather in the last 48 hours following gains of more than 30% from April's low. Amy Wu Silverman is the head of derivatives strategy at RBC.
Whenever I'm speaking at a relatively large meeting, so, maybe 30 or more investors, everyone's going around, they're talking about their bearish sentiment. And then if I say, show of hands, who thinks the market is going to be higher by year end? Like 90% of folks raise their hand. So it's this reluctance in the rally for sure. But then again, there's this impulse to be very concerned about that right tail and feel like they still have to chase it because they know that they cannot be left behind.
Amy Wu Silverman speaking there as the S&P 500's 12-month forward price-to-earnings ratio hit 22.9 this week. Now, that is a level that has been topped only twice this century. The other times, the dot-com bubble and the 2020 pandemic rally. Now, the US has cut tariffs on EU auto imports to 15%. It's retroactive, so back to the 1st of August. It locks in terms of trade that were struck in a deal almost 2 months ago. The move will help to ease tensions with Brussels, with shares in European car makers rising on the announcement. New car registrations across Europe also rose by 4.7% in August, according to to the continent's auto lobby, the ACEA, their latest data out today. On tariffs, most other new rates take effect from September, while exemptions remain for aircraft, pharmaceuticals and certain raw materials. Talks continue on steel and aluminium, where EU exports still face tariffs of up to 50%. Meanwhile, the Trump administration launches investigations into imports of robotics, industrial machinery and medical devices, setting the stage for fresh duties. So that's all the news when it comes to the US and the EU on tariffs. Now, here in the UK, the Bank of England governor and a key policymaker publicly disagreed about the rate path ahead, showing the split at the top of UK monetary policy. Andrew Bailey says that there is further to go on interest rate cuts due to the weakening labour market. But then hours later, Megan Green proposed skipping a cut in November due to fears around high inflation. The divide shows how macroeconomics is struggling to find easy answers to the trade war. Traders, meanwhile, see little prospect of the Bank of England moving rates in either November or December, and they have only 1 quarter point reduction fully priced in for 2026. Lastly, Russia plans to run a budget deficit for a 5th year as the costs of its war with Ukraine mount. The finance ministry projects a fiscal gap equivalent to about $55 billion in 2026. War spending is climbing while oil and gas revenue is falling, pushing Moscow to raise value-added tax rates and to borrow more. This comes as President Donald Trump is pointing to those strains, saying the Russian economy is weakening. He says with EU support, Ukraine is in a position to win back all the territory it lost since 2022. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged allies to take stronger action against Russia.
If it takes weapons to do it, if it takes pressure on Russia, then it must be done. And it must be done now. Otherwise, Putin will keep driving the war forward wider and deeper.
Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky speaking there at the UN General Assembly. Trump's shift on the country's chances of victory was hailed by officials in Kyiv and Europe, but the president has offered no new US measures to support Ukraine. Privately, officials are more concerned it puts the responsibility onto Europe to act. Those are our top stories for you this morning. Let's think about the markets then. Stock futures for Europe are down 0.1%. S&P 500 and Nasdaq E-mini futures, though, are higher. Despite the drops that we saw on Wall Street yesterday, the S&P 500 down 1.5%. The Hang Seng Tech Index this morning jumping almost 2%. CSI 300 Index almost 1% higher. 10-year Treasury yields easing a basis point to 4.14. And you also have the dollar this morning on the Bloomberg dollar spot index down by about 0.1%. So those are the markets right now. In a moment, we're going to bring you more on the news that HSBC says it's used a quantum processor to vastly improve bond trading. It's a trial result, but let's discuss it. And also why there's a growing standoff between the UK government and global pharma giants over medicine prices. Before we get to that, though, another story caught my eye. Disney, Jimmy Kimmel, the issue of free speech in the United States. Bloomberg's Beth Coet has an opinion column out that I just thought was really interesting because it detects a shift in the balance of risks for corporate leaders, which I thought was very fascinating. The only other person with more on the line maybe than Kimmel returning to the screens this week was Disney's CEO Bob Iger. Beth Coet, writing that he was the one who sidelined Kimmel, then he was the one who brought him back because of a backlash. Iger had been a strong critic of President Trump and the Trump administration during the president's first term. Then, when he returned to office, rather than sort of standing his ground, Iger cut back on Disney's DEI efforts. But then the backlash about cancelling Jimmy Kimmel has Iger really under pressure again. Trump's also threatening to sue ABC. But as Beth Coet explains, Iger's decision to reinstate Kimmel is a sign that companies are realising that perhaps they need to find their red lines and push back against the Trump administration. I thought this was interesting simply for the discussion around trends and what's going on with the Trump administration and how corporate America is thinking about it. I think it also has kind of global ramifications, but I'm going to put a link to Beth Carrott's opinion piece in our show notes for you. You can have a think about it, whatever your view on the subject. I think it was an interesting discussion. Now, HSBC says that it has achieved a breakthrough in deploying quantum computing in financial markets using IBM's Heron quantum processor. Joining me now to discuss this, Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo. Good morning. Look, to even understand this story, Tiwa, I think you have to wrap your mind around what quantum computing actually is. Can you just give us an idea of why people are just so excited about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty complicated, but I'll do my best to give you a quick overview. So quantum computing is based on the principles of quantum physics, and that's kind of a series of core principles that are true at the quantum level, so really different from classical physics. So, for example, you've got wave-particle duality that says all matter and energy at the quantum level can behave as both waves and particles. That's not true at other levels. But like the differences between quantum physics and classical physics, quantum computers are also pretty different to the normal computers that we're used to. So unlike normal computers that power your laptop or phone now, quantum computers can do calculations at the same time. So rather than trying to find the answer one step at a time, they do it all simultaneously, which is much faster, and it allows for more complex problems to be solved.
Yeah, much faster speeds, basically. And so what has HSBC done with this? What do they say they've achieved?
Well, according to them, they've conducted a trial that does show early indicators that quantum computing can be used to improve trading performance. Now, this wasn't live trading. It was a trial. It was also a collaboration with IBM. They used their most advanced Heron quantum processor, and they say that shows they're able to attain a 34% improvement in predicting how likely a bond will trade at a given price. Now, this processor that they've used is known as sort of best in class. It was released in 2023, and it's reportedly 5 times faster than the previous version from IBM, the Eagle. But this is significant, according to HSBC, because it's really the first time that any bank has used real trades at sort of a large scale to demonstrate the edge that could be offered by quantum computing. And in the context of the wider banking industry, it's also important because there's this race at the moment that's really hotting up amongst some of Wall Street's biggest names, and they're trying to embed the technology into their daily operations before any other rivals. So according to HSBC, they've taken a really important step towards doing this. And yes, I mean, it was a trial, but it's also the first time that any bank has really used a large number of real trades to show the benefits of the tech. Until now, it's been mostly deployed in the confines of academic research or by specialist firms. So perhaps HSBC here have made a really important step towards that real world application that's, of course, important for financial markets.
Yeah, and so that's why you've got them talking about a Sputnik moment. Why is that phrase important? It unleashed the competition between Russia and the US, to get to space, basically created NASA. So that's why it's kind of maybe seeing a big galvanizing effect. In terms of the financial titans then, who are already putting a lot of money into this area, what are they doing, and then what could we see coming next, potentially?
Yeah, so really up until this point, it's been tech firms that have been really driving the development in this space, but we are seeing financial services providers begin to invest heavily as well. So the likes of JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, they're all exploring the area, and I think they're definitely very interested in the potential benefits. And as I mentioned, they're really keen not to let competitors get ahead of them. But in terms of the payout, actually, from this angle, there's some research from McKinsey that says revenue from quantum computing could surge as much as $72 billion in a decade, from about $4 billion last year. And that's going to be fueled by developments in industries such as chemicals, life sciences and finance. So there's definitely this idea that, as we see so often in the sector, that if one Wall Street player is able to be successful in deploying the technology, there will be this sort of big snowball effect and others will really strive to keep up. And that's why some experts are saying that when quantum computing is adopted en masse in the financial services sector, it could be explosive. We could see it come all at once, all of a sudden. I mean, we've already seen Google saying last year that its latest quantum processor, Willa, has solved a problem in 5 minutes that the world's most powerful supercomputers couldn't do, even if they had been working on it since the universe began. So that's quite a big difference. So it seems like we could be well on our way to change in the sector.
Yeah. That is so fascinating, isn't it? HSBC, very enthusiastic about it. Although, of course, there's still much debate about quantum computing, what it can do. There are also issues, a bit like with AI, on kind of error rates. But anyway, I think it's a very interesting story to think about. And if you want to understand a bit more about this mind-blowing technology, I do also highly recommend watching mathematician Hannah Fry's Bloomberg documentary series on this. It's called The Future with Hannah Fry. And of course, she made an Emmy Award-winning episode called The Quantum Arms Race. She actually got to go to IBM, look at the research facility. So if you want to have a view of what this computer actually looks like, Fry talks about it, she sees it, she explains the technology. So yeah, you can have a look at that documentary. I really recommend it highly. My thanks to Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo then for taking us through that HSBC quantum computing story. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. Now, in the past month, more than £2 billion of investment has been paused or scrapped here in the UK. Why? Well, it's all to do with pharmaceutical companies who are calling the country the worst in Europe for drug prices. Now, Patrick Vallance, the UK's science minister, says that the government needs to fix the commercial relationship, even if it means paying more. Our UK politics reporter James Walcott joins me now to discuss how bad have relations between the UK government and the pharmaceutical sector actually become now?
Well, life science is one of the government's 8 growth areas in their industrial strategy. So that's where they think they can actually get serious economic growth if they pour money. You wouldn't think that if you were to look at some of the comments of pharmaceutical executives in recent weeks. I mean, Eli Lilly, you just mentioned, the UK is probably the worst in Europe for drug pricing. Novartis' UK boss called Britain largely uninvestable. Merck pulled out $1 billion in investment just recently, in the past 2 weeks. They had already built their office at King's Cross. They will leave it unoccupied. And then, as well as that, you have AstraZeneca, who back in January walked away from 450 million. And so there is this massive mismatch between the UK genuinely does have a very strong biotech sector. You look at the likes of AstraZeneca, you look at the likes of GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, and what is going on here. It's worth saying, Caroline, a lot of these announcements came right before the US president's state visit. And that is something that plays into this, where US tariffs and also NHS drug pricing have become key sticking points.
Yeah, and given the political importance, the huge significance of the NHS for voters in Britain, it's amazing that this story seems to be flying somewhat under the radar, I think, in the UK. Why are the two sides so far apart?
Well, on your flying under the radar point, this has been a slow burn.
Yes.
There are two things. There is the firewood, which is UK drug pricing policy, and there is the spark, which is the US tariff policy. Now, the drug pricing, if you're looking to buy a drug, the UK assesses it on what's called a QALY, which is how much it will improve your life for how much of a cost. And here in Britain, the NHS broadly goes between about £20,000 to £30,000 a year is a good price. The pharmaceutical sector says, no, that should be close to £50,000 a year. It's worth saying that Britain's measure has not been adjusted for inflation in 25 years. So the drug companies say, look, broadly, most healthcare sort of society organizations around the world spend about 15 to 20% of their sort of income a year on drugs. The NHS, it's 9%. So they go, you're getting a much better deal here than most others. Now, that's the firewood. There is then the spark. The US has said two things. One, it's weighing and threatening tariff prices on drug imports. Trump has said as much as 250% he's floated. That would be crippling. And for a lot of these pauses in UK investment, it's in tandem announced with US investment. So many are reorientating their resources over to America. The other is there is talk in the US of what's called a most favored nation policy, which is where you take the cheapest drug price around the world and apply it to America. And a lot of these drug companies are going, well, that would be Britain. And so unless we get prices higher in the UK, we are at risk of having to put UK prices over onto the US. Take those two together and you give even sort of normally quite mild-mannered CEOs the excuse to use language like the sort of things I just said to you.
Where does this leave then the public, voters, and also the UK economy?
So after the doctors themselves, the NHS spends its second largest part of its budget on drugs themselves, about 20 billion a year, give or take. If you were to see that start rising, and I will say there is an agreement that's part of the drug pricing called the Voluntary Agreement on Price, it's called VPAG. That limits drug prices to going up about 2% a year to limit NHS costs. Some drug makers would see it closer to 19% increases. So you take that 20 billion. When they announced this for a voluntary agreement, the government announced it saved 14 billion. So at the very least, you could see that unwinding. And it comes at a moment when really the government doesn't really have much money to spare. It would much rather be applying its health sector budget into the doctors and into productivity rather than into drugs. However, the standoff has been going on since the summer when Wes Street and the health secretary walked away from drug price negotiations. The comments this morning from the Science Minister, Patrick Vallance, suggests the government may be looking to try and resolve that. And he told both the FT, the BBC and press that pricing may have to be an issue. So currently, it seems like the government are working their way towards increasing drug prices.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.